Hello everyone, welcome to another Monday movie. I'm Mr. Blue Summers. So this week I'll be giving you a basic introduction to render elements in 3D Studio Max using the Mental Ray renderer. Render elements allows you to render parts of your scene, not as in objects or lights, but as in different passes of the render like specularity or diffuse. And this allows you to get much more control after the render by recombining elements in, say, Photoshop. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So let's get started. I have a simple scene here, and I'm illuminating it using photometric lighting. The materials are Mental Ray Pro materials. And one thing to note is that I'm not using any exposure control. This actually causes problems when you're rendering with elements because the elements are not passed through the exposure control itself. And so sometimes you can get blown out highlights. It can actually cause severe difficulties with certain elements like lighting. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So let's set up render elements for this scene. I'm going to open up my render setup panel and click on the render elements tab. And that's going to open up the render elements rollout. And I'm going to click on add. It's going to open up add render elements. And I'm just going to pick out a few here that I know I'm going to want later. I'm going to select diffuse. I'm going to want that. Lighting is a good one too. Let's take reflection, specularity, and Z-depth, and click OK. Now most of these don't require any kind of setup. Z-depth does, and let me show you a quick trick for how to set up Z-depth. What you need to do for this element is tell it the minimum and maximum depth to consider. The minimum depth being pure white, and the farthest depth, the maximum, being pure black. So how do I know what values are appropriate? Well, I'm going to minimize this here. And if I go back out into my perspective view and select my camera, we can actually use the environment ranges, which you see right here, environment ranges, in the camera settings in order to find out what those values should be. So the near range, I might say something like about here, so 2.3. And for the far range, I might want to capture a little bit more. So I'll put it back out here, say 10 feet away. So 2.3 close and 10 feet far away. That's my minimum and maximum. So I'm going to reopen my render setup panel and punch those in. 2.3 for the minimum, 10 feet for the maximum. And it looks like I'm all set. So I'll go back to my camera view and hit render, and now I'll have my render elements. So what we have here is the final render as we would see it normally. But what we also got were several render elements, and these are the information that we wanted so that we could use it in compositing later. Now I'll leave it to you, but go ahead and save out each one of these as a .tif file and make sure that you save them as 16-bit. So for example, final.tif, save, and you want 16-bit color, and be sure to store that alpha channel, and click OK. Okay, now let's switch over to Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is just click and drag my final.tif. Now, just as a note, one thing that you can do if you're feeling hardcore is try to recreate the final image using just the render elements. Now, I tend to recommend against this. I don't think it's really a time saver. It does give you a lot of control, and if you can do it and want to do it, go for it. But in my opinion, I like to start with the final image and then work into what I want. So I'm going to select my specular and click drag that in. So you can see here that I've got this darkness, but then there are small sections of light. And that's the specularity in my render. So I'm going to use the Move tool in Photoshop, click drag, bring it over to my final image, get it into place. And I'm going to change the blending mode to screen. And that's going to really make those details pop. If you're going to be doing any post work, usually you're trying to bring out the specularity, you're trying to make those bump maps really apparent. And this is something that I like to do in my renders as well, is to bring that in. And you can do this kind of technique for each one of these elements. So for example, I'm going to bring over Z depth. Same process, click drag into the final image, adjust it into place, and then alter the layer blend mode in order to get an effect that you're looking for. So I need to ask myself, what would I want to do that's based on depth? Well, for example, I might want to darken up the background a little bit. So I might set this to overlay. Oof, it's a little extreme. I'm going to back it down a little bit, the opacity and the fill, say about there, and then bring it up slightly to about there. And that really makes that teapot the center of attention in this particular render. So I'll leave the rest to you. Try going through each one of these render elements and experiment with it. See what it makes the image look like. Using render elements can give you an incredible level of control over the final render of your scene. Try to do it whenever possible, and especially when you're working on that final image.
Thanks for tuning in to another Monday Movie. You can find all of my Monday movies, as well as tutorials, resources, and downloads at my website, www.mrbluesummers.com.